Thanks so much, and good morning to everyone. I wanted to just put a little bit of context to this. We only have about a 15-minute slot to talk about this stuff, and there's so much to talk about. But the context for me is that this is quite personal stuff based on experience. There's a couple of things I absolutely know for sure in this room right now, and that is you guys probably collectively know a lot more about culture than I do individually. So why am I standing up here talking to you about it? I suppose in some ways for me, it's just about maybe sharing a perspective, just saying, well, this is how I think about it. This is what I try to do about it. And if you can learn a little bit from that, I'm sure what I'm going to show you, some of you may have seen some of the stuff before, you may know about the stuff, but just maybe there's going to be a few things in here that you haven't thought of, or that you haven't thought of from my perspective. And so if there's value in that for you, then I think I'm going to be happy today, all right? And as Hi5 always say, we're trying to build happier workplaces, so let's make the room happy. So culture is a contact sport. And the reason why I really stopped on that kind of title was because I think that there's been too much of a intellectual, analytical kind of approach to culture. We get quite obsessed about analyzing it and thinking about how to measure it, and we forget that ultimately culture really happens on the ground amongst people. So I'm on a bit of a mission, a bit of a life mission, to bring culture back into the workplace at a level where it's about teams working with people, working with each other, collaborating. So hopefully the title will make sense to you as we go through the slides. So we only have 15 minutes, as I said, and I think that we'll probably get through at least 3 things. Maybe a little bit about what we know about culture, or what we think we know about culture, how we should think and feel about it, from my perspective, okay? All right, I'm not here to tell you all about that. How we should think and feel about it in my perspective. And then I think something that Gary got me thinking about was, how can we build an effective case for culture? I mean, if you're sitting in your environments right now and you may be struggling or battling to kind of prove why we should be investing in this kind of work, that I've stumbled upon a few examples of where we could probably build quite a good business case for culture, if you haven't already thought of that already. So this will just be another way of maybe looking at it to try and build a hard case for what is often called a soft skill or a soft approach. So those are the 3 things I'm going to try and get through. Does that sound okay? Yeah, if you think if we get through that, you guys will walk away and say, okay, free coffee plus that's okay, cool. A couple of other speakers. Good morning. Okay, all right. Okay, so one of the things, I'm going to go through a couple of slides around what I think we know about culture. And there's a lot at the moment being spoken about employee experience versus employee engagement. And I have this saying that just reminds me about how I can separate those 2 things out, that employee experience ultimately is a reflection of your culture, and employee engagement is, I guess, ultimately the result of your culture. The one thing is true, whether you're sitting on one or the other side of the fence, whether you're more into we want to push employee experience, or you're sitting on the engagement side, the one thing is true, and that is it's all kind of ultimately around culture. And I honestly believe that the employee experience is gaining more momentum because it's about redefining cultures and how we can establish those experiences to be better, more productive, and ultimately drive up engagement for our employees. Another kind of saying that I think we all understand about culture is that there is actually no such thing as no culture, all right? So you can have bad culture, toxic, inappropriate, ineffective, good culture, but you never have no culture. And I've often walked into organizations where somebody would turn around and say, help us build a culture. And I'd say, well, what is your culture right now? And they say, we don't have one. But you do. You have a culture. You just haven't maybe understood it or labeled it or analyzed it or tried to understand it. But it does exist. It exists all around you, and there is no such thing as no culture. So knowing your culture and understanding what you're trying to aspire to is really, really important. And this is one of my more topical things that I'm working on at the moment is culture is very much a cognitive and an emotional concept. And I think it talks to my earlier point about, I think we spend a lot of time trying to understand culture cognitively. And let's face it does start with a thought. We've often had cultures start out as thoughts by leadership, by founders who go away and want to establish what it is that they want to be known for, right? What are their vision, their mission, the purpose that they're trying to establish, and how do they establish values linked to that? It all starts with thoughts and starts at a head level. But the disconnect comes in often where we actually forget that it actually is also part of an emotional experience. And culture for me about experience is that It's the employees who feel the way they do about your organization that is often a reflection of the culture. So you can say what you want it to be and you can aspire to it, but if you're missing the link on the emotional side, you're only getting half the story. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah? All right, you can go like that. No, it doesn't. You're talking rubbish. Move on, next slide. Okay. So we're gonna look a little bit at those kind of things in the next couple of slides as well, about how we can actually maybe change cultures and behavior at the emotional level as well, not just the cognitive. Another saying that I think resonates with me around culture is that it has to be a leader-led and a people-driven kind of approach. And I think that if you're not collaborating with your people around culture, you're also actually just selling or telling or driving culture. You know, I think there's a bunch of guys in the UK or in Europe that are pushing this thought of, you should inspire culture change and not force culture change, right? And often when we do it as a leader-led process, which is not a bad place to start, we want leaders to completely buy in, and we forget that it actually needs to happen again at the people level. So leader-led and people-driven is what culture really is all about. And this is where I want to bring the first kind of almost model or idea to you that I think we should start working on if we want to look at culture change in organizations. In the past, our belief was very much that if you define and align people, you will establish your culture. And so the define part is essential, right? We do want to have aspirational values, okay? We do want to say what we believe in, what we want to be known for. And we do try and align our people, but in our old thinking, we used to tell, sell, and basically have a fit in or F off approach, okay? Which is very much the kind of norm when you think about very structured, operational, very functional environments where people want to establish almost a monoculture. Subconsciously, I kind of used this color scheme on this slide because I thought of McDonald's, actually. I don't know, you can see it now maybe? Okay, maybe you can't unsee it, but it kind of has a little bit of a McDonald's kind of flavor to me, and that's almost descriptive of a very monoculture kind of environment, right? There's one way of doing things, all right? You come into the organization, we dip you in the McDonald's sauce, not literally, but hopefully in culturally, and you either fit in or you F off. There's no space to come in there and actually, change things up necessarily in a way that you wish, and you don't bring your diversity to that space. It is known for what it's known for, and it is very monoculture oriented. So it's a kind of an expert, top-down, almost arrogant approach to trying to build culture, define and align. But I'm going to show you that it is important to have define and align, and we're just missing certain elements. Okay, so hopefully the color on the slides is going to be, you can read that. The modern workplace is not like that though, right? The modern workplace, as we know, is being disrupted on many levels. I'm just looking at two levels here. Technology and society, right? If you haven't heard of the fourth industrial revolution, then you're probably in the second or third one yourself, okay? But the reality is the fourth industrial revolution is all about technological, exponential technologies, automation. We talk about 5G arriving like any minute now, and I don't know if you know what 5G will do to the world, okay? It like apparently is 100 times faster than 4G. Which means you can literally download a high-definition movie in 10 seconds, okay? Now, that's going to do a lot of things, not just for watching movies, okay? It's going to do amazing things for industries, workplaces, service delivery. So technology is disrupting workplaces, but society is also being disrupted through generational differences. There's talk of having 5 generations in the workplace. I find it very hard to believe because it means that if you're born before 1946, you're still at work, which means you're like, 70-something years old. Poor souls are still sitting there working. I imagine those are founders of companies, but there could actually be 5 generations in the workplace. And the last generation, the Gen Zs, are roughly, 18, 19, 20 years old. Which means my youngest child is 18, okay? And she'll be entering the workplace probably tomorrow if I have my way. Get out the house, okay? The reality is if you have 5 generations in the workplace, you're going to have some kind of complex social interactions, right? These are people that were born into digital, who don't know anything else. I don't know if you know this, but I'm older than the internet, literally. A lot of you are also very much older than the internet. And so we have a very different perspective and we have certain biases. So society is changing the workplace. And we know about diversity, inclusion, which is very topical at the moment as well. So your entire workplace is not looking for a define, align kind of approach to culture. What you're actually looking for is a define, align, more of a co-design and a refine type of approach, which means it's more agile. So I still believe that define is important, align is important, and there's a little model that I've always thought about, it's called the ESP approach to alignment, which is do it with empathy, give people space and apply some pressure, right? So if you are going to stop on a line, because there's some organizations are going to turn around and say, that's all we want to say what our culture is and we want our people to fit in, or they must just F off, all right? Then I'm going to say, approach it from the perspective of show empathy for where they're at, where have they come from. Some people have come from big corporates and now they're joining startup environments. They're going to want all that structure. Show empathy for them, give them space to adapt and assimilate, and eventually apply some pressure to get them on board. But I don't believe you should stop at a line. We need to co-design, collaborate at team level, design the behaviors and the habits that you want to see with the people that you're actually asking to deliver for you. And refine is very critical. So once you design those things, they don't get stuck in and cast in stone. You know, this approach of define, align is almost like coming down the mountain. You know, the leadership went away with the 10 commandments and they came down and they just dropped it there and they were like the truth and the rules forever. Design and refine means being agile, experimenting with your culture and changing it when you need to. And it takes a bit of courage to do that because it almost feels like, but then we have no culture again. Then we have this kind of like weird hybrid culture, and that's not true because we are still linking all of this design and refining to what we defined up front, which is our core values. So I think it is critical that leadership make a statement about values and about what we believe in. But I think it's even more critical that we allow our people to design and refine what that looks like for them on the ground. This is something I'm really trying to push a lot when I work with anybody now. I'm trying to get them to grasp this idea that it's okay to experiment and change your mind about what you do when it comes to culture, as long as you don't drift from your core. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So just to put it another way, or to show you some of the things that I think are important when we talk about this, I've never really seen culture change when you look at posters, right, on the wall. Now, a lot of people will say that's enough. But I think if you want to change culture, you have to change behavior. And if behavior is all about people, it means that culture is all about people, and maybe even better to say that culture is about people in action, in contact, collaborating. Going back to my title, which is why it kept ringing in my ears, is that culture is a contact sport. It means you have to be in contact, you have to be collaborating. If you're talking about behavior and changing behavior to change culture, you should be talking about people. So if you want to change it, design with and for collaboration. Don't do it as an expert approach. Don't try and change your culture by defining it and telling. Get people involved. Refine to be agile about your culture. Allow experimentation and bottom-up influence. And definitely champion culture from leadership. I don't think that you can have one or the other. And here's a bit of an example. So have any of you ever heard of habit stacking? It's kind of I suppose there's a guy out there who did a tech talk a few years back, BJ Fogg, he spoke about tiny habits. And it's all about trying to change behaviors in small ways, right? And habit stacking is one of those ways that you can maybe think about if you want to change and experiment with different kinds of behavior that might define your culture a little bit better. And what habit stacking says, it's a little bit like behavior architecture, right? Maybe I should start with an example, a case study. When you pull up to a traffic light and you see somebody selling the big issue, have you ever experienced that? Yeah. So they had a bit of a problem. I was going to say they had an issue. They had quite a big issue, right? Thank you. Thanks for that. And their issue was that motorists and the consumers out there were very defensive about vendors approaching them for the big issue. As I'm sure some of you, if you had to admit, like driving along with no money or no cash and this person's walking up to you who you just know needs this money, this is their livelihood, and you're driving up to the traffic light and you see them and now you don't want to make eye contact because you don't have the money to pay for the big issue. And there was a small niche consultancy called Gravity, I think it is, a guy by the name of Sebastian Thompson. And Sebastian and I had a conversation once about how they approach the big issues to try and turn that around. And to try and turn the defensive behavior of drivers around, they did a couple of things, and they invented something called the smart bib. And over time, you may not have realized it, but that bib that the guys wear has changed. So a couple of things changed. Number one, they did a partnership with SnapScan. So you can actually purchase a copy of the big issue without having cash in your pocket. So that took that out the way. The other thing they did, which I thought was even more innovative, was they created space for the vendors to write their objective on the actual bib. So I am selling for my family. All right? I am selling because I'm going to college or whatever. And then the last thing that I want to say, they also wrote, or they had little cards, which said if their target was 20 units for the day, that every time they sold one, they'd be able to turn those cards around and they would actually go down to 19, to 18, to 17. So by the time you pull up and you see somebody, you'll see an actual objective. So you started to share the conversation with this person. So when people started to drive up to the traffic lights and see a vendor, you actually feel a little bit more involved. And so you're not avoiding the conversation, you're actually starting to get involved. And that's a little bit of behavior architecture, changing a few things around the existing practice that maybe changes the behavior. So what I'm really trying to say about using this example is that it's not about chucking everything out of the window and trying to start again. Maybe you want to leverage off existing practices and existing behaviors and just tweak things that will help you get a better result from that. So in a work example, maybe one of your existing practices would be something called meetings, right? But you know that when you go to meetings, there's a certain ritual, a certain habit that gets sort of played out, and you know that that's not good culture. It just doesn't reflect what we want. You're not going to throw the meetings out the window. You're going to just change behaviors in the meeting. You're going to stack something onto that meeting that might change the way people see it. So one thing you might say is, it's a no technology meeting. And you might have a big sign at the door before they walk in and say, laptops, leave laptops at the door. I've been in environments where people would walk into the meeting and the first thing that happens, laptops are open and people are checking emails and we're trying to have conversations. All right, so you're not going to throw the meeting out the window, but you are going to change certain things about the way we do meetings, which is what habit stacking is all about. In a more personal sense, if you want to be more grateful in life, they talk about when you brush your teeth in the morning, as you put that toothpaste on and you start brushing your teeth, have a thought about what you're grateful for the day. It's a tiny little, you're stacking a habit onto an existing behavior, existing practice. So it's not meant to be such a dramatic shift. We're trying to change things incrementally. So how do you justify the investment in culture work? Okay, this is something that I know Gary's quite big on, and we have chatted about this before, about what can we maybe help people understand about how do we prove and justify the investment that this stuff is important? Now, I'm sure all of you sitting here are here for a reason. You're here because you like this culture stuff, you're interested in culture work. But can we prove to others who may be skeptical, who maybe control the budgets, that this stuff is really important to invest in? And almost in a Morpheus tone from the Matrix, I will say, what if I told you? Okay, what if I told you we had a hard case for soft skills? And I came across this thing called Employee Lifetime Value, ELTV. And for those that have been in anything to do with customer experience or client success and tracking the lifetime of a customer, you'll know that there is something called customer lifetime value. And it's kind of really taken from that. It's inspired by customer lifetime value. And we talk about employee lifetime value, and it really simply, if you look at the model, and I've just taken 4 measures. You could use something else. If you took just 4 measures like onboarding, quality of your hires, workplace culture, and growth and development, if you took those 4 things and you applied it in this theory, what you would say is that an employee has value to you, but when they start, that could be in the negative. And the reason it's in the negative is because you've kind of invested, right, before. To get them just to the door, to get them to sit at the desk first day, you've already invested some cash. So they actually start with almost a kind of a negative value because they're not really productive to you. And that ramp up to fully contributing is what essentially we would call onboarding, right? And that can be different for many different organizations. Could be something that, and I'm not talking about one-day orientation. Here's the manual, here's the company policies, you're on your own, all right? I'm talking about proper onboarding where the person gets to a point where they're actually functioning fully in the organization. Then there's even a slight increase as well when you talk about maybe they receive extra skills training, or maybe they're showing more of their skills. But in a very average organization, that would plateau at some point, and at some point they might decide to leave. And from that moment onwards, things start to decline, right? They become less engaged. Not because they hate you, but because maybe their mind is somewhere else, maybe they're handing over to somebody else, and they start becoming less productive and have less value to you. And ultimately, they get to the last day and they leave. And that space there is all about the value, their lifetime value, and that can be a certain amount of time. So now just to show you it with a few more overlays, it's all about how quickly you can ramp up, right? If you can invest in good work around onboarding and bringing a better culture into your onboarding and getting that person to understand your organization even better, and you speed that up, you've already increased the value, the potential value that that person could add to you if you speed that up in time, in a time sense. If your quality of hire is better, they're likely to hit a level of productivity higher than the next person or the other person. And if you invest in them just as much as you have for the other person, that slight increase of the ramp could also be about skill development, growth and development, and the length of time is retention, right? Because if you have great culture, they're not going to want to leave as quickly as the other person. Even though they might be headhunted, you might be able to attract them and retain them because they actually do enjoy working where they are. The fact is, people will leave organizations. But if you invest in this kind of stuff, you have a chance to possibly increase that lifespan, maybe even by 12 months. So now you have that entire space between those two graphs is an increase in the value, the employee lifetime value. And we don't only leave it at that, right? So I'm just going to reiterate where those points are. So you could have onboarding, quality of hire, growth and development, workplace culture, which is going to impact on this. But what has happened is this model has been applied in real rands and cents terms. So if we took an average salary of somebody and we took how much they actually would cost the organization and we had a net value, we can actually apply certain principles to it. And you can use any generic, globally accepted principles. I'm just putting a few of these up here because you can search the internet for these things. You might have your own measures, all right? But you can use anything like, well, there's a 48% improvement in quality or productivity, profitability, etc. Google did some research on the onboarding experience, saying 25% increase. I'm wrapping up now. And if you apply these things to these various levels, you can actually punch the numbers in and prove in this particular graph, and I can share this with you guys maybe afterwards, is that there was a 1-year extension, 36 months, where this person actually, so that's now having to hire somebody else, but that space in between equated to $1 million, all right? So there was an absolute value increase of $1 million if you actually invested more in employees over a 3-year period. And those numbers are available. I'll actually share that with you, maybe through Gary. We can do this afterwards. We can share that. The bonus part is just I want to show you that what you should actually remember is that when somebody is a brand ambassador and you've built good culture, they actually leave the organization but actually start promoting your organization outside. So the value actually stays high. Whereas somebody who bad mouths you decreases that value as well. So there's actually more of it. It's the whole net promoter score. So let's recap quickly. We've done what do we know about culture, or what I think we know about culture. And we know that it's leader-led, people-driven. We know that it's emotional and cognitive. How should we think about it? We need to define and refine our cultures, not just align people. And I think we've spoken a little bit about an effective case for investing in culture. And I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.